Our assignment this week is to work on a work breakdown structure. So WBS here. Our next step would be to finish a schedule from that, to come up with a schedule from that. Now, we're not being asked to do that in this class. There's a whole project management class that does focus around this sort of stuff that you're going to do. But it's important to understand your role within that. So while you might be a developer, you might be a network engineer, you might be a security person, you might be a tester, you do fit into the bigger project schedule, and understanding how it's made, how it's constructed can help you better contribute to the project. And who knows, someday you might be asked to help build the schedule and work on this sort of thing. So the project schedule is supposed to be the plan of what's going to happen in the project, day by day, possibly, certainly week by week and month by month. And so the idea is I want to fall into, from the work breakdown structure, to a schedule. The schedule is used as a tool to help us plan the work, but also as a measuring tool to see how far along we've come on the project. And so it's really important that we understand the details of the project and how the work is actually going to play out. From an estimation standpoint, just coming up with numbers is fine. But from an execution standpoint, having this big, long measuring stick isn't as good as it should be. I'm thinking of it this way. If you're playing a sports game and your goal is to score X number of points by the end and give up less than that, you can worry about the end game when it's along there. But the question is, at the end of the 10-minute mark or the 20-minute mark or the first half or whatever it's going to be, how close are we to that goal? Do we need to do more of something or less of something? That's what we need to figure out. That's what we want to measure along the way. And so remember, we had done a sample work breakdown structure beforehand. We'll actually play with this again. You'll see a video later on that we'll play with it using the structure we just looked at. But this is the one we saw in phase 4, the sample that we came across here. We're going to use that for now because it's a little bit less detailed to help us come up with that schedule. And so this had some tasks on it, had some durations on it, and most importantly, had some dependencies on it that gives us to the next step. We are going to use the resources. The resources is going to come up here in a minute, but this is where we start within the structure. Now, we saw also last time we came up with a rough schedule. By looking at the tasks and the dependencies, we know what work needs to come before what other work. This view that we're looking at does not give us a structure for how long it is. It doesn't give us scale. Writing a use case X might take much more time or less time than what design task or code task would be. Probably less than the code. In theory, I should have to be able to write a description of what the work's going to do much quicker than the actual work. But who knows? The goal of a schedule is to give us that scale, to show us what we are getting to. So given the work breakdown structure, we're close, but we're not a schedule yet. It gives us that outline. It gives us the data we need to form a schedule, but it provides us a very limited view of the work we're trying to get at. It misses the steps that we're going to take in order to get there, and it might be missing some of the dependencies that we would need from the process standpoint or particularly from resource standpoint. That's really what we need to get to. We need to get to dates. We ideally have our durations. We have the tasks, and then we also have how long we think those tasks are going to take, but those hour durations are probably in a bubble. It's just like, I think it'll take me a week to get this done, 40 hours. Well, the question comes up, are you going to be working a 40-hour week? Maybe you have vacation that week. Maybe it's a week that's a holiday that week. Maybe I have, a 2-hour staff meeting on that week. Maybe every day I have a half an hour stand-up meeting with a different project. I can't work on it. So we need to get into realistically what is your availability. Who is working on what? When can they work on this? That's what we need to get to in order to get to a good project. And that's what's called leveling the schedule. This last step is really, really the key. We want to take the details we put out there and we want to put them into probably a tool. Microsoft Project is a very standard tool for this. And so you would take that tool and you'd say, I have this list of tasks. And they're going to look much like the work breakdown structures. This task, this is how long it's going to take. But then that's where that who's working on it comes in. We assign it to a person. Now we can assign it to a role to start with. We saw before, we can actually hop back to that one. We saw before we had business analyst 1, business analyst 2, architect, designer 1, designer 2. We can probably take this and give it a rough schedule inside of the project. We can say on average, the business analyst will work 30 hours a week on any given project, and the architect might only work 20 hours a week on any given project because they have a lot of things going on. Where the designer might be working, we'll give them a whole 40 hours a week because we'll give them overtime. If they have other tasks to work on, they'll just take some overtime on that. So that's getting to the realistic parts. Even better, we get to actual names. So for me, I have vacation coming up next week. I'm only going to be working 2 out of 5 days, and so I'm not going to meet the deadline if something's due on Friday. It's going to have to be pushed until after I get back on vacation. Some projects do care about that. I want to know exactly what things are going to be done. If your project lasts for 2 years, it's probably less important to track the day-by-day activities. You might care about at the end of the month, where are we? At the end of the quarter, where are we? But a lot of projects these days run on 6 or 8 week cycles, or sometimes maybe even a 6-month cycle. But if there's a lot of work to get done, I might need to get to specific days. I might need you to block out specific times because I will have possibly a daily meeting, more often a couple times a week, maybe weekly, that's going to ask you, did you get these tasks accomplished? The schedule is something that will come up very regularly in most formal projects and will be asking you, on this date, this is what I assumed is done. This is what I assumed is where everything should be. Is this where we are? And so it gives us this first look into what the numbers are, and it gives us this feel for what the project needs to be. Now, we're coming back to talk about this because it's important to understand the schedule as it relates to the process and everything else that's going along. The process does not dictate execution. Process dictates the steps that are going to happen. And process in general slows down a project. If I throw out the process, I can generally get a project done quicker, especially on paper. When I take this first look at the schedule and I say I want to deliver by Christmas and I realize I can't deliver till New Year's, the first thing I look at is saying, hey, well, can I throw out all these review tasks? Can I throw out all these double checks? Can I throw out all these process elements that'll give me 2 or 3 weeks of extra time? And the feel might be, yeah, we can do that. It's overhead. I can release this without review. We'll just look at it informally. The point of the review is to not get you to a scheduled date, but once you get to that scheduled date, to know you have a good quality product. A good process should help you meet your dates if you can take the overhead of the tasks on the process. But there's many a project who meets its dates and then has software that has to be revisited and fixed later on because it wasn't very good quality. So I want to use the project to the schedule to ensure I'm getting the process quotes and ensure I'm getting the work done, and then be able to report on that. I want to see, am I finishing design when I thought I was going to be finishing design? Am I finishing coding when I thought I was going to be finishing coding? And then along the way, am I coding as much as I thought? So there could be a problem. I could have overestimated. I could have underestimated. I could have run into some technical issues that we didn't plan for. So sometimes it's going to help us identify a risk to say, hey, you know what? Every time we go off and test this thing, we end up having to spend 2 days to release the code because it's really, really slow to upload the code to the App Store and download it again. It takes 2 days to get that approved, and now we have to deal with that. Well, that's something you might want to adjust your timelines for. I don't know if that's true or not, just making it up. And that's where we get into refining the schedule. The schedule needs to be realistic to the project needs. It's accommodated for the stuff in theory, the process and the tasks and stuff, but we need to understand if we're not going to be done on time, what can we get done in that time? Is it acceptable to deliver part of the project? Let's say I can, I can't build a whole car, but I can get you an engine ready. I just can't get brakes on it. Is that acceptable? Probably not. But if I can get you engine brakes, but I can't get your car stereo, is that good enough? Oh, sure. I can always install the car stereo later on. That's something I don't need to get to work. It's just going to make my work better, and so we'll release it later on. If your project's spending too much, if that's something you can tell in your schedule. I'm running out of money too fast. well, what's going on? Is my schedule get worse or better? Um, not everything's linear in a project. It's not to say if I'm spending $1 million over the, well, let's say $1.2 million a year, I'm going to spend $100,000 a month. Normally, I spend $10,000 the first couple months, and then $150,000 in the middle somewhere, and then hopefully ramps back down at the end. So the schedule will tell us how much do we have work left, where's the budget going to be, is there some ways we can adjust things to be able to spend money more wisely. And so given this, there's lots of things we can do based off the schedule. We can throw people on to work longer hours or add some more workers. We can't do that without the information that's in the schedule. If some work has to be done by a key resource in a different department, we can't always throw more people to work on it. But sometimes we can say, hey, is it possible to work overtime? Work the weekend. If we can work, 10 hours a day on Saturday and Sunday, maybe we'll be caught up and back where we wanted to be. There's, again, the ability to remove tasks, take things out, move things around like we talked about. Don't throw the car stereo in the first release. Then, as far as budget goes, maybe we can shift schedules. Maybe we can do things slower or later on, get less expensive resources, do things differently that way. Or share work with another project. We can see the work that's going to be done. Maybe there's some other project that can take on that workload and do it later on, or defer it to some other point in time. The whole point of this is by writing down the schedule, we can see what we've done, we can see what we have to do, and we can make smart choices within that. Now, to be fair, your likely role within this is not the PM. Maybe a few of you are. I'm not going to say exclusively. But your likely role is probably to assist in the project manager in doing their work. You're going to gather the info and help them refine the schedule. So for most of you out there, understanding how they come up with this is important. I know as a junior programmer, I used to say, well, these are the 3 things I'm going to do. And the project manager would write down the schedule in A, then B, then C. And that's not the way you work. You don't. So like, let's say I'm going to code the database, code the software, test the software. And so they would write that down. So code the database. And they would come back to me after a week and say, is the database all coded? I'd be like, well, no. I mean, that's not how you do the work. You don't code all the database, then do all the rest of the code. You do the part of the database you're working on, then you do the code you're working on, then you test the code you're working on, then you go to the next thing. Well, it wasn't their fault. They wrote down what I told them. It was my fault, where what I really should have said was, I'm going to do the login functionality. So I code the database for the login functionality, I code the code for the login functionality, I test the code for the login functionality. Or I could just say I do the login functionality. I don't need to break it down that granularity. So instead of saying code the database, code the backend, code the test everything, what I should have said is code feature 1, code feature 2, code feature 3. And then that would have been more appropriate to the thing I would be working on. But it's also important for me to tell them the order I'm working on them. So if I need to do the login functionality before I do some other functionality, don't leave it to guess the order that's going to come up. Some of the tools will automatically pick something based off of whatever they do. So if there is an order, you tell them. So your ability to provide good information to your project manager is going to improve the quality of their schedule and reduce the amount of time you have to spend explaining yourself when you're actually doing the work, when you're explaining why you're behind or that doesn't align to the schedule. Well, if you make the schedule correct to begin with, you don't have to worry about that argument. So that's the whole point of this. The work breakdown structure is important, but it leads to really important things in the project. And so the better job you can do in defining a WBS, the better you can have your whole project be in the long run.